Hello and welcome to the Grant Professionals Association's webinar. This webinar is titled Program Evaluation, So Much More Than Success or Failure. My name is Kelly Romero and I am the Membership Director for the Grant Professionals Association and your webinar moderator for today. You are all placed in listen-only mode, which means that your line is muted. If you would like to ask a question, please feel free to use the chat box on your screen to submit your questions. We will get to as many questions as time permits throughout this webinar. You have received the copies of the slides in the email invite where the dial information is. They are located on the right side of that email under deliverables or materials. At the end of this webinar, you will be directed to a brief survey. We ask that you please fill it out to assist us with our future webinars. Today's presenters are Becky Crump, GPC, and Dr. Florence Chang. Since 2010, Becky has worked more than 25 years in grant development and administration. Currently as Director of Resource Development for Jefferson County Public Schools, Ms. Crump directs the ongoing search for external funding opportunities for JCPS, the 28th largest district in the nation, with more than 101,000 students. She also directs the district's combined employee giving campaign, which raises almost $500,000 annually. She also teaches Grant Fundamentals Workshop for the University of Louisville and conducts several grant workshops each year in the community. Dr. Florence Chang serves as the Director of the Planning and Program Evaluation Unit in Jefferson County Public Schools in Louisville, Kentucky. She began her career in 2002 as a researcher for the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill in the area of early childhood education and moved to Jefferson County Public Schools in 2005, where she has developed and conducted program evaluations in multiple domains at the local, state, and federal levels. Her areas of interest are understanding how to improve school culture and climate, evaluating the implementation and impact of social and emotional learning programs, and designing evaluations to understand the whole child. Ladies, if you haven't already, please feel free to dial *7 to unmute your line and begin your presentation.
Good afternoon. This is Becky Crump. As Kelly said, I'm Director of Resource Development for Jefferson County Public Schools. And my name is Florence Chang. I am the Director of Planning and Program Evaluation with the same organization. And I am here in place of Dr. Judy Vandehar, who you will see on the first slide. So she was not able to be here today, but we will be here in her place. Thanks.
And I'm very thankful that Florence stepped in at the last minute, and you all are very fortunate. I've worked with Florence for several years, and she's a wonderful evaluator and will have some great resources for you all. We have a lot of information to get through in an hour. We want to give you an opportunity to ask questions. Really, Florence is the expert here in this area. I'm just here to sort of help set the tone and introduce. Of course, my background is in grant writing. I work with Florence a lot on the grant applications that we do in the district. We have a great department, and so a lot of resources. We're very fortunate. We understand that a lot of organizations don't have the same capacity, so what we hope to do today is to give you some ideas and some examples and some resources and tools that you can use in the applications that you develop. Just to sort of give you a little context, Okay, here we go. So as Kelly said, and actually I think in this year we are now the 27th largest district in the United States. Including preschool students, we have about 104,000 students, 18,000 employees. We're a very large, diverse district with many challenges. About 67% of our students qualify for free and reduced lunch, almost 8,000 homeless students, lots of English language learners. Over 50% of our students identify as non-white, high mobility. So we are a district with many, many challenges. So that kind of gives you the demographics of our district. So in the unit that Florence and I are with two different units, but we're under the same umbrella within the organization. Resource development, data management, planning, and program evaluation are under the same unit. The unit that she's a part of is a central office unit responsible for district-wide academic and non-academic data collection and management, program evaluation, institutional research and training, accountability, which includes testing services, school and district planning. They do a lot of reports, white papers to assist with policy development. It's very fortunate for the unit that does grant to be a part of this unit. That really helps us a lot. I'm having some difficulty with advancing the slides. Okay. Resource development has the primary responsibility for grants, and we do all levels of grants, everything from a $500 teacher-level grant to the multi-million-dollar multi-year grants. We provide technical assistance to our project directors in the management and administration of grants. We are also responsible for seeking, tracking, and reporting all donations to the district with 172 schools. That can be very, very challenging. We do implement the district-wide fundraiser for our 4 community organization partners. We do training in the district to help build capacity in terms of grant writing, grant development, and that is a 5 full-time staff, and I do have an AmeriCorps Vista in my office. So the goal today is really about helping you all become more informed and more comfortable with program evaluation. Florence and I have talked about sometimes for people who are not evaluators, program evaluation can be very intimidating. Some people sort of look at it as one of these things you got to do as part of a grant application, but we kind of see it as a very valuable tool, and we really want you to get more comfortable with the concept, gain a better understanding of how it can really help you not only develop a better grant application, but a better project in general. All right, now I'm going to let Florence talk some about this topic.
Okay, and while we are going through the slides, if you want to share with us something specific you want to learn while we're talking about program evaluation, please go ahead and put that into the chat area, and as they pop up, we'll try to make sure we address as many of those goals as we can. So, but as Becky said, I work as the Director of Program Evaluation, and it is kind of a scary word. I would say evaluation is something that our teachers, our principals still worry, oh, it's a judgment, but on me as a person, but we try to share with people it is not about that. It is about, and like the title of our presentation, it is not about success or failure. It is about improving quality and making sure that your stakeholders and your customers are getting the outcomes that you intend. And so we talk about our customers primarily being students, and so a lot of the examples I'll go through today have to do with students, but we do understand this is a diverse group of people in the audience. So think about, I would ask you to think about who are your primary stakeholders that you serve with your program. So the purpose of evaluation, we're going to go through the entire process, mistakes that we've seen, data issues, and then strategies, tools, and tips. What it's not, first of all, we want to clarify, it's not just a compliance process, so evaluation should not be viewed as something that you just have to check off on a grant. And it's also not just reporting numbers, and a lot of times that's what people want to do. So we might have a meeting, and when we talk about data, they might just say, well, we had this many people come to this session. And that's information, but it's not necessarily evaluation. Or on the flip side, sometimes people want to go very anecdotal, and they want to talk about specific people in the program or a specific case. And while that is valuable as part of an evaluation, it is not the sole data source. And then it does not necessarily need to be complex. So it can be complex on large federal grants, but depending on your program size as well as the stakes of the evaluation, it does not have to be something scary or overly complex. The most important tip, I would say, in terms of talking about evaluation is thinking about it being a process, a feedback process. So you work with your stakeholders, and there are multiple opportunities for checks on the program, on implementation, monitoring, and feedback from your stakeholders. And so by doing that, you make evaluation part of program improvement and not just something you do at the end. We've seen in our field that there is an increasing demand for evaluation as part of grants or board of trustees in different nonprofits have asked for more evaluation data because most organizations, including Jefferson County schools, where we are, we're budget-wise always trying to figure out how to make cuts and be more efficient with our systems and our programs. And so we are seeing evaluation data being asked on more and more programs so we can help our superintendent and the cabinet make decisions about what programs should move forward and which ones we need to cut. So it is something that is becoming more high stakes. And even with charity rankings, you might see an increasing movement for nonprofits to start reporting their effectiveness. And there are watchdog groups, for example, that are starting to talk about ranking nonprofits based on effectiveness. So why we evaluate? Well, we want to evaluate for many reasons. We want to know if and what you're doing is making a difference. We want to know how can you improve. And we also want to make sure we have accountability for our resources. I would say the most important thing in this process is to really understand what you want to know, because oftentimes I've seen projects that get overwhelmed in a lot of questions. They make it very complex, and they don't keep their focus on what do you really want to know at the end. You want to make sure you clarify that question and backwards map from there. So if you really want to know if your mentoring program is making a difference, then you need to make sure you're measuring things about, did the mentoring happen with the kids? Did they meet on a regular basis? What was the quality of the mentoring? And then what were some of the outcomes that you would expect based on those mentoring activities? So you really want to make sure you focus on those end activities and not jump too quickly to things that are not logical. For example, you might say, well, let's look at mentoring and then look at their reading scores or look at their social studies scores. And unless you have a really strong logic for that, you may not want to design something that has such lofty long-term goals. So really focus on what you want to know and go backwards. Be realistic. So to know if it works, you want to have a logical process of connecting your program activities to your intended goals or outcomes, and be realistic. We often see really ambitious programs in terms of outcomes, but when you look at the intensity of their activities, they don't always match. So for example, we might see a summer intervention that runs for 2 weeks with a group of kids, and then they want to look at their impact the following year. And I tell people, when you have a program that runs for a very short period of time, it's unlikely that you're going to see really, really long impact in our field, in education. So, for example, sometimes people want to close the achievement gap. And that is an issue that's plagued education for decades. And so it's unrealistic to say we're going to have a summer intervention to close the achievement gap. That is something that is persistent and has very complex reasons for why it exists. So just to make sure that you match your outcomes with the intensity of the programs that are designed.
Yeah. Okay. I might, so we're kind of at, just so we give everybody a chance to answer or ask questions, and we thought we might do this as we go along instead of holding them on until the end. We might just pause and see if anybody has any questions up to this point.
Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to enter them in the chat box, or you can actually raise your hand and we can direct you how to unmute your line.
All right.
Okay, while people are thinking, we'll continue to the next slide. So we understand, so you want to know if your programs are working, and you also understand how to make it better. So that goes back to the feedback system I was talking about earlier, where you want, whenever possible, to have your evaluation person and any other program manager meet on a regular basis, or look at data on a regular basis to kind of see what are some things that might be unexpected early on, especially if you're launching something new. So for example, we worked on a mentoring program, as I discussed earlier, where we had community volunteers go into schools and work with kids. And one of the unintended things was we had kids that were being pulled out of the same class every week. And so though the goal of the program was good, that we wanted kids who are at risk to have a high quality relationship with an adult and build relationship with a community member, we learned early on, well, that person takes the same hour out of the day every time they come, and so this kid is missing 20% of their math class, for example. And so we had to adjust accordingly once we realized that was happening. And so those early conversations are always helpful to be able to address some unintended consequences or address any barriers that might happen to continue to make your program implementation as strong as possible. Okay, and then throughout the process, you want to make sure you have a plan for the expectations and the accountability for whenever possible, and think about who is your audience that you would be communicating data and evaluation information to. Is it outline? Is it a board? Is it parents? Is it your customers? Who is it that you want to communicate this information with, and what is the accountability in terms of how high stakes is this project going to be? So if it's something that is going to drive decisions related to programs being cut or high stakes involved, major things changing about the program, you want to make sure to adjust your program for that high stakes endpoint. So the more high stakes it is, the more thorough you want to make sure your evaluation process is. The American Evaluation Association have collected data about how different organizations use their data. This is a chart to show different ways that different community groups use their information. And so what the big message is all of them use their evaluation data when it's collected, and you see in the chart the various ways it's being utilized. So primarily it's as an update to their board of directors, but it can also go to scaling all the way down to scaling strategies up. So it can be a pilot that you're trying to figure out if you want to make bigger, or it can be as a communication point with other stakeholders and possible funders, proposal funders. So they're used in a variety of ways. As a planning tool, evaluation whenever possible, should be a team process. So it should involve not just the people collecting the data, but the team planning the activities. So if you're a program director or grant writer, including the evaluator early on is really helpful, because then you can align your objectives and your goals with the measures and the evaluation activities. It also ensures that you don't miss opportunities for data collection. For example, after an event, sometimes is the best time to get some quick participant feedback, but sometimes we're asked to collect, in our group, feedback after an event's already been held. And so once you've got the participants not in the room, of course, it's a lot harder to collect that data. So whenever you can team early and create your processes together, that is valuable. And depending again on the structure of your organization, often it's helpful to have advisory groups. So for example, in our unit, we often have other stakeholders that might not be involved with the program, but they might come and listen to the initiative, what's going on with the initiative, because they have either technical expertise or some sort of investment that they can give us feedback on. So for example, something with kids, we might get an advisory group that involves parents or teachers, and they might not be the direct stakeholders, but they are an important group to consult with. So here are some of the key steps to the program evaluation. Again, I emphasize always having the end point in mind about what do you really want to evaluate. That is the key question. Make sure you always know what you want, the questions you want to answer at the end. And then go about understanding how and when will they be answered. What are the specific steps for each evaluation component that's built in? Who's responsible? What are your resources that you're going to have to do this? And who is it going to be? Who's going to get the data? How is it going to be used? And what's your timeline? So all of those obviously impact how you design your evaluation. A logic model is always good to sketch out, and basically what this is an example, a generic example of what it might look like, but it makes people focus on what are your resources and inputs, meaning what's your staff resources, what is the time, money, equipment, technology needed to launch the program, then what are the specific activities that will happen as a result of the program. Are you delivering services, workshops, counseling? So looking at different activities, looking at outputs being things like, are you going to produce brochures, have deliverables, have papers as a result of this program? And then, of course, the most important things, looking at results, your short-term, long-term, and overall impact. So that can vary from immediate customer satisfaction with the program all the way to long-term impact related to social outcomes or economic outcomes, and then overall impact being broad impact maybe on community. So it's very helpful to sketch that logic model out whenever you can. It doesn't have to be as complex as this example. The next slide shows a very simple example in terms of what it can look like. So you might have, for example, an after-school tutoring program as your activity. So, and the inputs is not on this slide, but obviously you would need a building, some volunteers, materials for the tutor. So those would be your inputs. Your outputs would be the number of students tutored, number of sessions offered, number of minutes. Those are all different ways you can track some outputs. And then your short-term outcomes could be things like looking at the kids' attendance, looking at their completion of homework. And then overall, your outcomes are to look at their math grades or the percent of students that maintain high math grades throughout the year. So that's a simple logic model, but it's helpful to sketch out so you can go through each of those bullets and make sure you're collecting data on a regular basis. So that's a really quick overview of the process of program evaluation. I'll go through a few of the mistakes that we sometimes see when we're working with programs and that we've learned ourselves through working on different programs. First is not using resources that already exist. So sometimes program managers want to write their own surveys or have a very cumbersome data process when you might consider things that already exist. So, for example, if you're looking at an engagement survey of some sort, it is always helpful to look at research or do a literature review as to existing data tools that might already be out there. The nice thing about existing data tools is they've already been vetted, they've already been piloted. The survey items typically have reliability and validity metrics that are associated with it. So it helps if you can find data tools that already exist. Secondly, keeping it simple is something we always emphasize. We have a very large district, and sometimes people want to do too much or throw too many questions into a survey or go in and measure 100 things when really if you look at what they really want to know, you can keep it much simpler than people sometimes do. So for example, I always encourage people, if you're doing a survey and it's 20 pages long, look at every question. Are you really going to use every question to drive decision making or improvement? Because sometimes things like even demographic questions, we often ask just because we're used to asking race, we're used to asking gender and age of the respondent. Sometimes we never use that data. So I always, tell people unless you're going to use that data, be careful to collect it just to collect it, or just because you're used to collecting it. So keep it simple and keep in mind the respect of the time it takes for your customers to complete the data collection as well. And then not always explaining or thinking proactively about how you're going to use the program evaluation data can be something that we see as a problem, only because sometimes you don't realize till the end, our board really wanted to know this, or, we totally forgot about this component. And sometimes it's been where people are so focused on the activities, they forget to keep those goals and objectives in mind. So, and also be careful about expecting results too early. If you design a program and the outcomes in your logic model, sometimes people want to know right away, is it having an impact? And sometimes it's just too early to know if it's having an impact. And then, again, to go back to focusing on your key purpose and mission, I worked on a project that the goal outlined in the proposal was to serve underrepresented demographics, kids who are struggling, or kids from diverse backgrounds, and giving them educational opportunities in the summer. And it was a high-quality program in terms of it aimed to give kids a lot of enrichment activities in the summer, but their goal was to serve kids that don't typically get those services. And what we found in the evaluation coming out was the program itself ran great. The kids were engaged, outcomes were positive, but when we looked at who they served primarily an affluent group of kids. And so again, they missed their sole purpose. Their primary purpose was to aim at helping kids that don't get these activities. And what happened was the kids who came to the activities ended up being pretty resourced already. And so that was one where, I think if you realize early on maybe that your participants weren't the right group, you could adjust. But they didn't realize till the end, and that became obviously a problem with their board when we presented that data.
One thing I'm going to interject in terms from a funder standpoint is I work with a lot of groups, and one of the things they're sometimes very reluctant to do is if in a grant-funded project the result of your evaluation indicates that you didn't have the impact that you thought you were going to have, that you anticipated, people are very reluctant to reveal that to a funder. They're very reluctant to provide the results. And the thing is part of program evaluation is about quality improvement, about what you learn, and what you need to do is you need to be upfront and honest about what the evaluation demonstrated. You talk about this was the result, this is what we learned, this is what we would change based on what we learned. And that's how you frame it. And you don't try to spin it, you don't try to you don't leave it out. But a program evaluation is about learning and learning how you would do differently, and funders understand that. But sometimes I run into people who are very, very reluctant to share when program evaluations don't come out and show what they intended to accomplish. That happens a lot. That happens a lot to us.
Right.
We'll tell you that.
Yeah.
That happens a lot to us. We look at it and figure out, well, what did we learn? And from this, how would we do something differently? And that's what you discuss with your funder.
Right. Absolutely. So, yes, we've learned a lot from working on various grants and projects. Just it surprisingly happens a lot that we didn't anticipate not meeting goals or not answering questions that the board or your constituents are wanting to know. And so having those conversations and clarifications early, we can't emphasize enough the importance of that communication. So in terms of data and what types of data to be looking at, it's important to look at both, we call it qualitative and quantitative data, but simply put, you're looking at the words or the numbers. They're both important. Use both whenever you can. I always find it's helpful to have numbers. And again, it's to adjust to your audience. I usually find in an audience there's some people who gravitate towards numbers. They want to know what percent increase and whatever. And some people want the qualitative. They want to hear about focus groups or surveys or participant feedback in terms of descriptions. And so both are usually very helpful whenever you can include. You might also think about always including a piece about perceptions from the people you are serving. And so in our district, that sometimes does get lost. We don't always ask the students, what do you think about this program? We will collect all sorts of data on other things about the kids and then not ask the kids themselves, how did you feel, or what suggestions do you have? So incorporating voice of the participants is always helpful. Looking at, again, numbers in terms of what is the most critical numbers, and be creative in terms of sometimes we always look internally often with numbers, but we also realize now there are a lot of community indicators, other indicators outside of what we collect that can be helpful. So when we look at our dropout rate, for example, or graduation data, it might also be helpful for us to look at the number of violent crimes that's collected by our metro government in terms of juvenile delinquency. Even though that's a little bit outside of what we collect, we've also started looking at different numbers that are collected from other agencies. this is a good quote just to remind people that not everything that counts can be counted, not everything that can be counted counts. And I think for people who work in nonprofits especially, that can really resonate, because sometimes what you see as program impact or effects can't always be counted. So for example, I worked in a program that was doing music outreach for kids. And how do you really measure the impact of giving kids an experience at the orchestra that they may never have experienced in their life? So that was something that was really hard to really count effectively. Yes, we can say this number of kids never went to the orchestra before and now they have, but that doesn't really capture probably the impact for that kid. And we could ask surveys, but there's something a little bit elusive about a variable like that we realized didn't always get counted in a report. So that is something to always keep in mind. And then looking at the length and overall structure of your program, thinking about what did it look like before? Are you moving in the right direction? Did it have an impact? Again, that's just another way of looking at program evaluation. This next slide shows different levels of evaluation that you might experience and be able to design. So waiting for the slide. There you go. So you can always do something, even if your program ended a year ago. There's always creative ways to go back and look at data. And there's of course, different amounts of resources, but you can always look at what participants say about the impact themselves, looking at pre-post changes, so before and after things change, and then looking at multiple data sources, so looking at people from different perspectives. You might talk to teachers as well as students as well as principals, just different perspectives on the same data.
We have a question that kind of addresses this the survey issue. So I think maybe we'll go ahead and answer. And I'm going to have, this is Florence's area, so I'm going to go have her address this.
Right. So in terms of, if you are interested in collecting data from schools, the question is related to getting consent. Of course, it is extremely important if you work with children to get institutional review boards and ethics committees to review your processes. With a school district like ours, what we do is we have a process in place to look at what people are requesting, external people are requesting. Depending on what they're asking for, they may or may not need active consent. If it's secondary data or if it's something built into curriculum, something we're already doing. For example, we're working with a local university on the impact of a math intervention that their professors are providing to teachers. In that case, we did not need active consent from parents because it's something that we're building into our curriculum and instruction. So we didn't need active consent to get student-level data to that professor. But in terms of, if you need active consent, for example, you're going in and you need to get parent consent or student consent often too on a project, you need to work with that institution's research review board. And it's called different things sometimes. Sometimes it's research review, sometimes it's institutional review, or ethics committee sometimes runs this. In our group, it's under the purview of research activities. If you're not sure, if you call the institution and talk to their director of, usually it's director of research or even director of communications, usually knows what is the process for obtaining active consent. But once you get the protocols approved, then you go to the school level, and often it's through principals. So it's usually through principals. We'll distribute those consents and get those back. And there's also sometimes, depending on what you're actually doing, we've had opt-out consents where parents are given, say, a newsletter, and saying there's a group coming in to do a survey, and if you don't want your child to participate, you may opt them out. And sometimes that's a nice option to keep your response rate up and your participation rate up. And we only use those options when something is very low stakes. So it's something really that has no possible harmful effects on kids. So, but that is an option depending on what you're doing. Okay. So if you are outlining an evaluation section for a grant, this is a nice, just simple overview of things to include in a grant proposal. You might have the description of the program with a logic model, but most importantly, having your evaluation questions outlined, your method, and your timeline. And sometimes I put it in the form of a table where you might have 3 columns. So your first column might be your questions, then your second, questions/objectives, and then your second, your method of collection, and then your third, when and who's going to collect. If you put it in a table and align your questions with your method and your reporting timeline, the grant reviewer can see that the process has been thought through and you have a very clear time frame for how everything's going to happen. So the extent to which you can make it really clear on the reader, the grant reader and reviewer, I have found that to be really helpful in when we get the feedback on our program evaluation scores that we receive. Just to show that alignment is critical. Lastly, we're going to go through just some basic logistics of evaluations in terms of who do you use for an evaluation. You can use internal people, so internal versus external. There's pros and cons to both. If you use an internal staff member to collect data, it usually is helpful in terms of you might already have trust established between your stakeholders. So, for example, if it's somebody that if I go into a school and the principal already knows me and has worked with me, we already have a relationship established versus bringing an external person in from, say, a university and they don't know that person. It can be threatening, for example. But the drawback, of course, is that internal people can be seen as biased, and external people, evaluators, tend to be better received by say, a reviewer or a board. Sometimes a board prefers to see somebody external do evaluations. There is a resource out there called the American Evaluation Association. They have a list of evaluators by state that you can look through, and then you can also look at partnerships with other agencies. Sometimes you might be able to find, for example, a university will have doctoral students that might adopt an evaluation as part of a program, a project, a class project, and they might be a resource to collect data.
We did have the question from one of the nonprofits about if you don't have an internal evaluator, do you have other resources? And Florence talked about looking to universities or colleges, doctoral students. You can certainly go to the look for evaluators in your state. Was it AEA, American Evaluators Association? Any other ideas regarding that?
Depending on your resources, sometimes it's easier to contract locally with some. Ideally, you can get a doctoral student. Those are always great resources. The department you would look for is usually in evaluation. We have an evaluation group at the University of Louisville locally, so we have doctoral students in that program, so senior level doctoral students. But you also could look at sometimes psychology departments even have doctoral level research staff that they might be able to provide some technical assistance at least, or actual grant evaluation opportunities through classes. You also could look at contracting with local evaluators, so again looking at AEA. Depending on the scope of your work, sometimes you can find, if you have a small evaluation component, you can find someone locally to do a small project. Or I would say don't be afraid. If you have no resources, then I would use some of the online resources to design your own and collect your own data. It's not ideal. It's not ideal to have to do that, but if you absolutely have no resources around, you certainly can have surveys. You can collect your own surveys, collect your own pieces of data related to implementation. Just going beyond numbers is often helpful, so don't be afraid to also go through webinars like this that are available through organizations. They often can give you some skill sets just to design simple evaluations. Okay, and we kind of hit on this with the consent issue, but of course, depending on your group of customers, you want to think about ethics and privacy. That certainly is something we think about a lot with our group of stakeholders, with kids and parents and that sort of thing. And then, and how does that weigh against the knowledge or innovation or things that you're going to contribute with the program, design and evaluation. So we always try to balance those two. We want to be learning from our program without imposing on the privacy or ethics of our participants. So again, here are some tips about what organizations can do to support evaluation, planning, and implementation. When you outline your objectives and you outline your target population, your resources and inputs, going back to the question of what do I do if I don't have an evaluator, if you're able to outline this on your own or with your team and speak to what are you actually doing specifically and how can we collect information on those key goals, that goes a long way to presenting this to other funders or your board. So I would certainly think this is a very basic level of review for any program that you want to implement. We've talked about different ways to collect data a little bit, but of course surveys are really low cost and can be highly informative ways to collect data. You can look at self-report in terms of you have online tools like SurveyMonkey, or even Google Docs, I think, has some survey capability. You can do one-time self-reports. One popular way to collect data is to do what they call a retrospective survey. So instead of doing a pre-post where you're looking at something at the beginning of the program and something at the end, you can do a post-only survey, which is a survey you collect at the end, and you ask your participant, thinking about this program, to what extent did it impact your knowledge, for example, and they have to rate the impact on their own, if that makes sense. So instead of, for example, if we run an intervention for or program professional development for social studies teachers, I could take a pre-post of their knowledge. I could say, I'm going to give you a test on American history at the beginning, and then at the end, and we're going to see if you actually showed growth in content knowledge. Or I could ask the teachers at the end, did you feel like your knowledge increased as a result of this program? So there are two different ways to look at it. And depending on who you're collecting it for, you can go either way. So there's pros and cons to both of those methods, but that's an example of just doing a post only. And again, we've talked about working with organizations and existing data sets and instruments and getting permissions. Our group often tries to look online for data. Things like the National Center for Education Statistics or our local health department, metro governments, other advocacy groups often collect data that we find useful in evaluations or have measures and collection tools that they provide publicly and free of charge. So it's always good to look at both your local institutions that align with your work and national ones to see they might already have resources available. These are some quick resources to examine as a first pass, depending on your comfort level with evaluation. But the national group is in the American Evaluation Association. We also there is a book online called the Joint Program Evaluation Standards that goes into much more detail into all the processes we talked about today. And then there's survey resources such as SurveyMonkey that you can utilize for evaluation.
That has Judy Vanderhart and my email, but I'm sure Florence wouldn't mind giving you her email. She probably wouldn't mind if you emailed her for questions.
Right, absolutely. So my email is just florence.chang, C-H-A-N-G, and it's at the same place as Becky's at jefferson.kyschools.us. If you email either Judy or Becky, they can reach me, or they themselves are fantastic resources. So, and Judy, even though she's not here, she's very receptive to email and helping any way possible. So I still encourage you to ask her, even if she's not here. So.
Judy has actually worked with a lot of community organizations on program evaluation, so she's very knowledgeable about that. So we're almost to the end, but we do have a few minutes for questions if anybody has any more questions. Okay, well, if you think of questions or would like additional information, you're free to contact us afterwards. We appreciate everybody being on the webinar today, and we appreciate your time, and we hope you found this helpful.
Thank you very much.
All right. Good job.
Good job.
We did it.
Hopefully.
I thought it was very good. They hung with us to the end.
Do I just hang up here?
Yeah.
Becky, Florence, are you still there? Becky?
The conference has been unmuted.
Becky or Florence, are you still there?
Kelly, are you still there? Oh, okay. Well, I'm going to hang up.